Hi, thanks for joining me and welcome back. So what I wanted to talk about today is, for me, at first, a new brand, not a new label. The label obviously is Deutsche Grammophon, as we can see here, and the brand is the Original Source series, which is a kind of high quality audiophile series that's been launched by Deutsche Grammophon, and everything about them is extremely impressive. So I'll tell you a little bit about what you get and how these are different to the normal issues, and then we'll get on to the sound and my findings. Okay, so first of all, if I open one of these up, we can see what we get in here. So you get, first of all, the record comes in a nice sort of protective outer sleeve with a sticker on it explaining that these are pure analog mix and cuts from the original half-inch 4-track tapes produced and recorded by Rainer Brock and Gunther Hermans, mixed by Rainer Millard and cut by Sidney Meyer, directly from the original analog source in Emil Berliner Studios, manufactured at Optimal Media in 180 gram virgin vinyl. More on that later. Okay, so what these essentially are, the originals, Deutsche Grammophons of this era were recorded to half-inch 4-track, so kind of quadraphonics, stereo front and stereo back. Although they weren't obviously released as quadraphonic records, they were at the time mixed down from 4-track half-inch to 2-track quarter-inch, and that became the stereo master from which all of their records were cut. So this is what you get, which, I mean, from the cover point of view, it's a lovely, thick, matte cover. Check that out. It's really, really nicely done. Really nicely done, in fact. And you've got a gatefold here. And these are the original kind of master tape notes. It explains here all the details of the recording, and feels really nice and authentic. You've got a little bit of text here which explains, for the 125th anniversary, which was in 2023, that's when this Original Source series was started. And these are cut directly from the 4-track masters, so they're mixed from 4-track to 2-track, kind of live, on the fly, if you like. They've had to specifically modify a half-inch 4-track master recorder to give you a preview. Studer A80 2-track master recorder famously was available in a version with preview heads, and they've had to come up with something. So basically this is done kind of all analog, cut directly from those original recorded 4-track session tapes, if you like. So it's as fresh and as immediate and as close to the source as you're ever going to get, which is an absolutely commendable thing. And I will get on to more about this later. And here we are. Here's a photo of the actual tape box. Okay, so we can see here it's quadraphonic, original quadraphonic and stereo 4-track, Dolby A, recorded with a Dolby 361 decoder, IEC equalization, 15 IPS, etc., tones and all the rest of it. So all very nice. Now there's about, I don't know, I'm guessing there's about 20 or 30 titles in this series so far, and there's certainly a fair few that I would be interested in. I'm not the world's greatest classical music buff, so my tastes are fairly popular classics, if you like. And Stravinsky, the Rite of Spring, the Sacre du Printemps, is one of my favorites. Okay, and I've got half a dozen or so different versions of this, and I'll very briefly refer to them when we talk about the sound quality. But that's essentially what the series is about. And then if we look in here, this is the actual record. Comes in a very nice lined black inner sleeve. And as the notes say, this is pressed at optimal on 180 gram virgin vinyl. More on that later, as I say. So, Stravinsky Rite Spring, one of my absolute favourites, without a doubt. And just putting this version on, you know, there is no question. It is an absolutely superb sounding record. There is absolutely no question about that. The dynamic range, the depth of the bass, and it's a big, impressive, sort of bombastic piece of work. The Rite of Spring, and that's, you know, as a bit of a classical music Luddite, that's probably why it's one of my favourites. And I'm just going to go. I'll show you my other copies of this I've got here. So, you know, these are just various versions I've got on vinyl. Over the years, funnily enough, this is probably one of my favourites. I love the performance of it, and as you can see, it's a digital recording. Digital recordings can actually sound good, but this is one of my favourites. This is another one, Schulte with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra on Decca. And then this one's sort of, you know, very hell for leather, you know, incredibly kind of bombastic. So I've got a few. I know it really quite well, but it's not, you know, I say I'm not a classical music buff by any means. So in terms of the performance and the recording, I would say this is absolutely in the top drawer. It really, really, really is. And then there is one massive caveat about this, which, if it wasn't for that, this would be, without any question, my number one copy from here going on forwards, okay? And I'll come back to that. The other record I bought, I only bought the two to start off with, because they're moderately expensive. They're 55 euros each. And again, I'll get back to that, because there's a very curious thing about that. But, you know, here we got Debussy, Trois Nocturnes, and Ravel, Daphnis and Chloe. Now, Daphnis and Chloe, or Daphne and Chloe, Daphnis and Chloe, I think it's pronounced. I think it's a Greek tragedy that's been sort of retold over the decades many times, or over the centuries many times. Now, there's something that kind of ties these two pieces of music together. It's what I call the Star Trek choir, and it's sort of a wordless, angelic sort of kind of choir thing going on over the top of some incredibly lush, beautiful, massive, hugely dynamic, huge swells of sort of powerful massed strings, and then timpani, and sort of right back into just maybe some woodwind or a flute or something, and just contrasts and swishing backwards and forwards, just absolutely beautiful, and very, very similar with the Debussy. I'm very much a sort of an art, got a degree in fine art. It's something that's very close to my heart. And Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe, I believe the first performance, or certainly a very early performance of this as a ballet, the stage and the costumes were all designed by Marc Chagall, one of my favourite painters of all time. So, you know, there's so many levels this music touches me. And, you know, I've got this, and I'm showing you the other versions I've got of the Stravinsky. I mean, that my, you know, number one place in terms of Daphnis and Chloe is this Analog Productions Ultra tape, which is just... It's exquisite. It's to die for. It's absolutely exquisite. And I've got quite a few versions on vinyl of that too. But this here, now this probably is now my definitive go-to version of this on vinyl. And for exactly the same reasons that I would say that the Rite of Spring would have been, if not for that caveat. So it is lush, it's beautiful, it's massive, sort of in a soundstage spatial way, in a dynamic way, it is just jaw-droppingly massive. The power and intensity and lushness of the big sort of crescendos or sort of swells of massed strings, the weight and depth of the timpani sort of right at the back of the soundstage, and the horns right at the back of the soundstage. It's just absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Worth every penny I paid for this. Now, I will say there was one thing, if there was any criticism whatsoever, well, apart from the fact I got a seam split, which is really irritating on a brand new record, but there we go. Especially on an expensive brand new record, but as I say, there we go. There is just a couple, very, very few, not sufficient for me to want to change it, although I will be writing to Deutsche Grammophon later today. But there are just one or two little tiny ticks. It's not the world's greatest, quietest pressing, but there's a few very tiny ticks. And I think that combined with the seam split, it's, if I was feeling pedantic, I would get onto them, but otherwise I'd let it go, okay? One other thing I want to point out, this is the second edition, okay? And curiously, the second editions cost €55. The titles where they still have the first edition available, it's 46 or 47 euros. Now that makes absolutely no sense to me, but I will be investigating that further. Okay. Now we get to the Rite of Spring. Again, second edition, same as that, Preston Optimal. Now this one here, all those things I could say about the sound quality apply to this too. It is massively powerful. It is huge. It is lush. It is just absolutely, utterly captivating. And as you know with this music, there's a lot of very loud, very, very heavy, dynamic, huge sections, passages within this piece of music. But then we'll go from a massively loud sort of, bombastic sort of boom, 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 to a very quiet and serene and still almost kind of section within the composition. But right from the word go, when you put the needle stylus into the running groove, there's quite a lot of tiny pops, like quite a lot. It sounds like sort of frying eggs or frying bacon. Quiet, they're not loud sort of ticks, tiny, tiny, tiny little pops. The sort of thing you would not hear if you were in the next room, for instance. And you possibly wouldn't hear if you were listening to it quite quietly. But if you're listening to it in anything even vaguely approaching realistic levels, those pops are really intrusive. And as I say, they're not loud, but my God, there's a lot of them. It's pretty much continuous, and you literally cannot hear them behind the loud sections. But throughout, on the quieter passages, it's like all over the soundstage, left, right, whatever, tiny little ticks, and it is so distracting. It's absolutely unlistenable, and it is such a shame because, as I said, this, the performance is just wonderful, the recording is just wonderful. What Deutsche Grammophon have done for this issue, which is going back to that 4-track master, mixing it on the fly and cutting directly, fully analog, all analog, is absolutely commendable. And you can hear the quality of the music, the sound quality, the dynamic range, the natural timbres. It is absolutely wonderful. But the pressing is abysmal. It is absolutely shocking. And I will write to Deutsche Grammophon this afternoon and, ask for a replacement of this. I think it's important with something like this, we've got to feed back to them, because the work that Deutsche Grammophon themselves have done, the recording, setting up the performance, obviously, back in the case of the case of this one, 1970, in the Boston Symphony Hall, they set up the recording. They've mixed and mastered it absolutely beautifully. I can only imagine it's cut well. These noises, they don't sound like a cutting noise. They sound like, fairly honestly, really sloppy pressing. And I'm really surprised at Optimal over this. And but I've heard this from a couple of friends of mine who've got some of these, and they've said it's just, it's shocking. They need to take them back. They need to go back to Optimal and get them to repress. And if Optimal can't manage it, then they need to take them to somewhere else, whether it's RTI or there's a whole load of other, decent QRP, Paramount. There's a lot of decent pressing plants coming online these days, and the pressing of these is an absolute letdown. Now, depending on what they say, if they are happy to replace them and the replacements come through, there's a good half dozen of these that I will buy because at the drop of a hat, because they've got some really wonderful titles, and what they've done with these are amazing. As I say, this one, maybe just by chance, sounds superb. The pressing quality is, I would say it was very, very good rather than excellent. There are still the tiniest little ticks, 2 or 3 throughout, and I can live with 2 or 3 tiny little ticks throughout. But this one here, you've got 2 or 3 tiny little ticks every 10 or 15 seconds, and that is absolutely not good enough. So there we have it. Deutsche Grammophon's original Source series, showing massive promise. I will get a couple more I've got to see how often it's a miss rather than a hit on the pressing quality. I will try and get another version of this because musically is wonderful, the performance is wonderful, the recording is wonderful. It really is just that fried eggs going on in the background scenario that is just unbearable. Okay, on that note, I'll say thank you very much for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye for now. Bye.